he said, I'm Braden McMurdie, part of McMurdie Ranch. Tony asked me to do this about a month and a half ago. I said I wished he would have asked me 6 months ago. I might have documented some of my mistakes and things that we've done a little differently. But anyway, this is what it is. So this is what our place looked like a few weeks ago when it rained. This is what it'll look like in a few more months, probably, when it quits, when the sun comes out. A little bit about our operation. We're farming roughly about 500 irrigated, flood irrigated mostly, acres. We do have a few sprinklers. And we're growing mainly cover crops. We grow silage corn, grain corn, alfalfa, and wheat rotations. What's that? We are located in East Tremont, between town and the river. So we're close to this area. Approximately 3,000 rangeland acres with some improved pasture. And we're running 300 mothers and some stockers on that operation as well. Our place is not contiguous. Our rangeland's in southern Idaho, with our farm being in Tremont. So that's one of our challenges that we're working with this program. Why cover crops? We went to a meeting a few years back, and this quote was given. Don Campbell's a producer up in Canada, I believe, and he travels giving these similar speeches. And he says, if you want to make little changes, change the way you do things. If you want to make major changes, change the way you see things. And that really got us thinking in this cover crop idea about how we see our operation, how we see our soils, and how we see things going forward. Like I said, we run this operation, my dad and my brother and our three families. We don't have a lot of farm ground for three families, so we're figuring out how to become more profitable per acre. And we've found some success and some failures and working through some of our things, but we're finding that cover crops is one of those venues where we're able to do that. The first thought was that we would extend our grazing with cover crops significantly. We're grazing 200 plus mama cows on 170 acres clear into January after we come off the range. We started feeding a little bit earlier this year because of the way the snow melted and crusted over and kept the cows from being able to dig through it. We still have some cover crops standing to be able to be grazed when the snow will allow us. So we'll talk a little bit more about that coming up. We wanted to improve our operation by when it says filling gaps, that's the growth gaps between cash crops. We want to keep something growing in our soil all the time. And obviously, decreasing our input costs with these cover crops allow us to do that. And that grazing cover crops is profitable because of that. So when we got started, we did a lot of this. We would do in the same fields right next to each other, we would do some strips of tillage and some strips of no tillage. As you can see, there's a lot of biomass there on top and beneath the soil. We started slow this way. We wanted to see the effects as we went along. We started doing things like watering our wheat back just to keep it growing rather than disking it. We just water it, let it grow. If we had the water to put on it, and let something grow there and be green, and that started to improve our soil. We didn't have any way to drill at first, so we did a lot of air seeding. IFA would come over and blow it on with some fertilizer. We'd harrow it once, water it up. It worked really good. We'd do mixes, we do straight seeds that way. It worked just fine. But we wanted to dive a little further into the different crops that we planted, the timing when we would plant them, planting with cash crops. So we went ahead and we bought a no-till drill in 2017. And that allowed us to improve some of our practices. We started drilling our own mixes. We've worked really closely with Jeff and Jed at the NRCS office to help design mixes that are beneficial to our area and that focus on the resources that we want to accomplish, the concerns that we have with our soil. And this year we've started drilling cover crops into cash crops. Things like faba beans in with corn, clovers in with our corn. We've done some cool season grasses in with our alfalfa, some fall biennials that way, and we're reducing the use of our synthetic fertilizer. It's a weaning process. Maybe you've heard that talked about before. We couldn't drop our synthetic fertilizer overnight like maybe we would have wanted to because of the cost that it is, because our soil was dependent upon that to grow our crops. But as our soil improves, we're cutting back significantly on that. Today we're less than half of what we were 5 years ago, and we're working to improve that. So these are some of the crops that we've grown. We hayed this one. This was a sorghum mix. There's 13 different species in that mix, and it was designed to increase the carbon of that soil, the biomass of that soil. That grew back. That yielded about 11.5 tons with very, very little synthetic fertilizer, and that grew back, and we grazed it, and there's a picture of that later on. We grow a lot of brassicas in the fall after our wheat, and they do very well. Radishes help us retain whatever nitrogen's in the soil. We select the cover crop plants based on what we're trying to accomplish. These are some of our mixes that we've put together. If we don't have a mix where we don't plant a nitrogen fixer, that's a big cost to us. We want nitrogen back in the soil. We want to use sunlight to do that. So every mix we have will have that. The triticale, cowpeas, collards, hairy vetch. That's a no-brainer for our operation. We can plant that after a corn crop. It does very well. It winters well, and it's a very good grazer in the spring. If you manage that properly, you can graze it and hay it, or you can graze it continually. We've grazed it 2 or 3 times. I've heard of guys getting as many as 5 times, depending on how aggressive they want to be with their rotations. Like I said, we tried the garbanzo beans, clover, and chickling vetch in with our grain corn this year. We found a lot of success. You can see some of the tests on the corn stubble and vetch down below on winter foraging. 11.5% crude protein, 175 RFE. That test was taken 3 weeks ago, so the beginning of the month. Everything was froze down. The millet lost its value very fast after the frost, so that was more of a getting the ground covered. The cows come in, terminated the crop, and covered the soil. They did eat and were selective and picked through what they wanted of that mix. The sorghum still tests well after it's froze. You can see there 9% crude protein. Cows do very well on that before they calve. So a note on that, on our mixes, our fall biennials will always outproduce our spring cool season grasses. So if we can plant in the fall, we'll always try to do that. Here's an example of that mix. Here's one from green covers. As you can see, we got warm season legume, cool season grasses, cool season broadleafs. The sun hemp is a high producer, grows really well. Plant that in the spring, late spring. That'll grow, chest high. The Hubam, chest high, great producer. Chickling vetch. We've had great success with vetches. They're high nitrogen fixers. They're great foragers. They withstand the weather very well. They'll stay green. We try and put some of those in all of our mixes. The sunflowers down at the bottom were more designed for the carbon cows just picked through. They ate the leaves, they ate the fine stuff, and they left the stalk, and that gave us something left on the soil. So we've had great luck with the collards and the kale as well on those. So here's some of those different mixes. Some cowpea, some sorghum over here. As you can see, there's some BMR right here in this middle one. That BMR always tests better, and the cows always eat it better. And as you can see, it produces very well. There's that sun hemp I was telling you about. We've had great luck with that as a summer crop. Fixes a lot of nitrogen and grows very well. That over here on the right is generally what our fields might look like when we go in to drill them, maybe in the fall, as we've either hayed or pastured, and then if there's a weed problem, we will use herbicide. We try not to, but we have had to use a lot of herbicides. We flood irrigate, as I said, so that's generated a lot more weed problems than maybe otherwise on like a dry farm scenario, whereas every time we water, we scatter a new selection of weeds. So that's always a fun battle to deal with. Some of the different tests, we had Marlon come out with the class and Jeff, and they come out and we looked at some of our soils. I just wanted to point some of these out because they help us to see that we are progressing in our soils. So they did an infiltration test, if you've ever seen that done with the ring, the 3-inch ring in the soil. They put the first inch in to get the ground wet. The second inch was absorbed in 7 minutes. That scored an 8.5 inches per hour score if we were to get that kind of moisture on there. So, and when we're flooding, we almost can't even put that amount of moisture on our ground at one flooding. So the soil's improving very well that way. The compaction test was done with only one watering when we originally planted. We watered it up. It hadn't been watered in over a month, and he went 5.5 inches with that his meter before he hit 300. 300 is the number where plant roots won't penetrate any deeper. They did the 2-inch water test. We went 11.5 inches with just 2 inches of water before hitting that level. So some of our complications, as I said, the weed problems. This field was overtaken by water grass, which is in every time we flood irrigate, there's those seeds in there. So we had to go in and use a herbicide, get rid of that, and then replant in there. We always leave the biomass when we have those weed problems. We leave it there. The soil takes it, consumes it, and we just use it to our advantage as best we can. The more bare soil that we see when we plant a cover crop, the more weeds we get every time, without fail. And then there's been a learning curve with our herbicides, residuals, timing, those types of things. It's best when you're thinking cover crops, if you can plan out through the year from the type of crop you want, what you want to accomplish, how you're going to terminate it, you'll be able to have less problems with whether it's a residual problem or your cash crop coming up the next year. It just works out better. We're grazing some triticale and hairy vetch there. We let that go all the way to seed, a small pasture, and just put some animals on it. And it did very well. They grazed clear into the summer on that. So we try and follow this pattern of whatever we take off a field, we put it back on. So if we do need to chop or bale or hay something from that particular field, if we can feed it back onto that ground later and put that back on that soil, it works to our advantage. We rent some ground, and some of that rented ground we'll take off of that and either use that as our cash crop, or we'll bring it to our own ground and feed it on our ground to help improve that. And then always our main target is to try and forage whatever cover crops we can to improve that soil biology. So this is that regrowth from that first picture. As you can see, the weather's knocked it over, but it got a couple feet tall, and those cows and about 200-pound fall calves are doing very well on it. We fed them hay up in the bunk, and they would not come up and eat green hay. That's what they wanted. Until the snow buried it, they stayed down there. We use a predator called polywire to confine, to help trample. As you can see, there's a lot of green. This is December when we put the cows in. There's a lot of biomass. If you think about, we think about what our feed rations were in a feed yard, where we'd mix straw, we'd have our protein, hay, we'd have our corn silage, and that's what we grew, and let the cows do the selection. We give them a little more space in the winter than we would maybe on a green growing type of a cover crop. They seem to do better. They select better and keep their condition better that way. But they've still terminated that crop, laid it over, and did very well on it. The last thing I wanted to mention was we are dabbling with trying to improve our range with polywire, confining the animals a little more rather than just turning them out, moving them more often. And we've noticed more species of plants and growth. We've been able to increase our grazing time. Grazing and moving and not taking everything allows for more photosynthesis in the soil. And we're starting to see a little success with that as we've been working on that. So those are some of the basic things that we've tried to adapt these principles of soil health to our operation. Any questions? I'm just that good, huh? I covered it all. Yeah?
You guys are on sandy ground, right?
We have very sandy, blow sandy.
Trouble with gophers, and how do cover crops and not really get into that?
Trouble with rodent animals. We don't have a lot of our farm's very close to the city. There's roads all around it. We don't have a lot of rodent problems. Holes, yeah, we flood a lot of water onto it, so that really keeps them down, yeah. So there's plenty of foxes living in every barn and backyard around there too, so.
Cost per acre for your seed mix is pretty similar to what on the earlier presentation, or what can you pretty much figure per acre for implementing seed costs?
Okay, that's a good question. Cost seed per acre on the cover crops you're talking about. Yeah, so when we design our mixes, we'll keep that in mind. We'll usually have a limit that we don't try to exceed. It depends on if we're trying to grow is the most amount of biomass that we can, or what our resources that we're trying to accomplish. Yeah, so generally, like a mix like you've seen, that sorghum mix, 13, 14 different species, will be around $35.
Yeah, the stuff you do in the river bottom.
Mm-hmm. And 11 tons on the first cutting, and then another 2-foot regrowth on the second. So like I said, grazing is, cover crops are profitable. That's pretty cheap feed.
Is that 11 tons dry matter?
Yep.
So, and then did you feed that back on?
Yeah, and then we take that feed and feed it back on. In that case, we did not feed on that field. We fed on another field on our farm, but it was going back into our farm. Okay? Yeah?
Stocking rates do you get
Stocking rates.
with the cattle?
Yeah, so depending on if we have weeds take over or how well it grows, but generally, like on that winter where we were winter pasturing, an acre in that scenario would do a cow. You plan on about an acre for a cow for a month, 1 cow a month. So, but we'll do In the winter time, we'll do a less dense stocking rate and move them more or less often. But in the summertime, we haven't grazed a lot in the summertime because we have so much range. But we'll try and increase our animals per acre to terminate that cover in the summertime, or to allow for more carbon. So, but yeah, generally that winter feed scenario was about a cow for a month, generally on an AUM.
Do you have a device that you use to wind up your fence so you can move it?
Yeah, it's right here.
Oh, yeah, I'm okay. We move
No.
a lot of electric fence ourselves.
Do you? We haven't dove into any of the electric reels or anything like that. We just go out. We have the wheels, crank them up. It's pretty fast, but there's still some time that it does take. It's the electric fence. So all our cows are kept in around the farm. We don't have any permanent fences on our farm. It's all hot wire.
Must be by battery then, huh?
We have some solar-powered ones, and we have some plug-ins. Plug-in ones generally hit a little harder, but the solar-powered ones do fine. The first year we did it, we had a few cows that like to jump. That's fine. They went to somebody else's operation. They can jump somebody else's fence. Our cows, they don't. There's been times, in fact, this morning I went out, our fence was laid over in a drifted snow. I don't know if it'd been there for 2 or 3 days, laid over. Cows weren't out. They stay there. They know where the feed's at. They're trained to it. Sometimes we leave it unplugged. It's not even on for a week or two, and we'll realize we need to go plug it in.
You got tame cattle.
They're just used to it. They don't like it.
What's the, do you see, you actually observe the difference between an area where you have a diverse crop, bunch of crops growing versus just a monocrop? Is there a lot of difference that makes? Or what difference does that make?
That goes in, for me, that I'm not a soil biologist. If you understand the soil, you would see it better. When they come out, and that soil, that aggregate soil in that jar is from our farm. And when they come out and pulled that soil, there was over 20 some odd earthworms in that couple of shovel. I never had an earthworm anywhere in my farm other than the ditch banks where we didn't disc before that. So that's where I go into what Marlon was saying, where you trust the system. You understand what to look for, and then trust that it's going to happen if you plant these diversities. But I'll tell you, that's only 2 years of diverse no-till and cover crops. I would, if I was thirsty enough, I would drink that water underneath that, on the jar to the right. I mean, it's holding together, and that's been sitting in Jed's desk for 6 months or whatever. Any other questions? Yeah.
Do you grow any perennials?
Well, yes and no. We had great success with forage collards, impact forage collards, and we put them in a lot of our mixes. They were a biannual originally. They turned into a perennial because they just keep coming back. If you plant hairy vetch, that can turn into a perennial. That stuff is relentless. We've kind of gone to a common vetch or a chickling vetch because it produces just as well, but you don't have to, if you want to plant something where you don't want the vetch in there, you don't have to try and kill it or spray it out. So, but no, not generally. We haven't on our farm ground planted, other than like our alfalfa that we're putting cool season grasses into, the alfalfa being the perennial. That would be the only thing.
So do you then you have the if the alfalfa is your perennial, then you'll bring the cool season grass into that as an annual?
Yeah.
And grow them together?
Exactly. So we've tried a few different things with alfalfa. We've done spring barley. That did okay. The trouble was that it was slow getting going in the spring, and then if you don't have a rain and you're trying to flood it, by the time you do that, the alfalfa's there ready to take off, so it smothered it out. We've grown teff grass and found success in like an alfalfa field that's old and thin. We cut the first crop, or pastured it, and then plant the teff grass at the second crop, and then by the third and fourth get high yields with the teff grass. I don't have any pictures of that, but we did find success doing that. And then this year we did winter triticale in several of our alfalfa fields, and it was up about 1 inch to 2 inches before the winter came. So we've got high hopes for that. That'll come up with the spring crop of alfalfa, and hopefully we can rejuvenate some of our alfalfa fields that way, because we are haying them still as a cash crop or to feed the cows. So trying to put something back in there. We have just started testing, yes, if there's been change in the soil pH. We have noticed slight changes. We don't have a lot of background testing to verify that, but going forward we have plans to continue to test. We've gone from most of our fields being 1 to 2 organic matter, and in 2 to 3 years, we have been growing cover crops for 5-6 years, but no-till has only been the last few years, and we've got fields now that are 3.5 in our organic matter. And that goes along with what you're saying. There's some changes in the balance of the soil. But all in all, it's been a positive changes for the crops. So, like I said, our biggest problem is weeds. We're always battling that irrigation, that new crop of weeds that's coming through with our water. So we're really trying to nail down on how to overcome that for our operation. But as far as the soil health, it's done very well.
You said that when you started, you sprayed it on the no-till. Did that work?
So when we started planting the crops, we would have IFA would come and blow it on with their air seeder.
And it worked okay?
It worked well with the seeds that do well in that type of scenario, because we'd harrow it. So if you were trying to plant like a BMR grazing corn, it would never work.
No. But like
Yeah, because
your annual grasses.
the grasses did very well, the brassicas did very well with that air seeding, and then just a light harrow, water it up. Of course, the wheat would always come back, so we would plant accordingly, realizing that we were going to get wheat coming back in, so our planting was a little thinner. So, yeah. I've told you everything I don't know now. That it, Tony? Time?